All right, so it is now late March, and I've just finished reading Don't Call Us Dead by Danez Smith. Danez Smith is I believe, identifying as non-binary poet from the Midwest. I believe they're based out of Minneapolis, and is both Black and HIV positive. And this collection focuses a lot on that and what it means to be both Black and gay, but then also what it means to be both Black and HIV positive. Really, I think there's kind of three main sections to this collection. Really, the first part, I would argue, is really based on just what it means to be both Black and gay and being part of the intersectionality. The second part focuses a lot more on the HIV diagnosis and what that means to not only Danes, but also what that means to their family. And then the third part, which is actually, I think, two separate sections, is focused a lot on this. I think that there's a video out there of Danez Smith doing kind of a talk about some of the poems from this collection before reading them, in which it's like I think they described it as a coming together of modes of death, which is really, I think, what a lot of that third portion of this collection really focuses on. So yeah, certainly I do not have these experiences, right? And therefore, like, I can't speak on what a lot of these poems are getting at, right, without becoming insensitive in some way. I can certainly look at them from kind of an academic perspective. However, that doesn't inherently mean that I'm getting what I need to get out of poetry, right? So I think there's two poems I really want to focus on. The first one's is, I believe it's called Dinosaur in the Hood, which I will try my best to remember to put a link to it below this, but they do a really, really great reading of this poem, which I think is really important to understanding this, because Dinosaurs in the Hood is, like, on the surface level, it's like a funny poem. It's humorous, it's kind of joking around, it's making fun of certain things that we constantly see in film and in media. Some things that they mention, there's a joke in here about making sure that Tarantino doesn't direct it, because if Tarantino directs it, there will be a opening scene in which a young Black boy plays with a toy gun, and that being a metaphor for how Black boys toy with their lives, and he doesn't want the Wayans brothers to direct it because we want to make sure that there's no racist stereotypes of Asian people in it. We joke about making sure that doesn't become like a Will Smith, Sofia Vergara buddy cop film, right? But at the same time, we're also asking that this isn't a black movie. And I think this best gets summed up in the ending line of the first stanza, and sees the T-Rex because there has to be T-Rex. And I think in the Dane Smith reading, they do it really well, and they do it in really humorous fashion without showing that that's how this all kind of sets up, in which we are going to a dinosaur film and therefore we expect to see T-Rexes because there has to be T-Rexes, even though there's a whole bunch of other dinosaurs that we can put into the movie and make this gigantic thing. We have to put a T-Rex in it simply because it is a dinosaur movie, and therefore there has to be T-Rex. This in the same way goes for what it means to be, or what it means to have anyone who is black be in the movie or be a director for the movie, is that there's an audience expectation there in which, because something has black people in it, or because something is somehow involved with black people, that we need to make it about black struggle. We need to make it about extinction of races, right? We need to, that is the expectation that is brought into something simply because there is a black lead character, or because that it is directed by a black person, right? And so we can't have that, right? As much as we want this to be just a fun dinosaur movie that happens to be set in a majority, if not all, black community, somehow, some way, no matter what happens in it, an audience member will make it about black life, black power, black struggle, right? So I think that's kind of the first thing there, and then it kind of gets expanded upon between, was it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, between the 5th and 6th stanzas. They end the 5th stanza with, this can't be a black movie, this can't be diminished, beginning of the 7th stanza, because of its cast or its audience. This movie can't be a metaphor for black people and extinction. Yeah. And right before that, they're talking about making sure that there's a death where it's a black power salute with a hair pick into a dinosaur's throat. And right, we want, because if we take these things and we understand the context of them, and then we put them in this new situation, it becomes a visually funny scene, but we can't have that kind of fun and that kind of joking because of the fact that no matter what happens, we are always going to end up making it about black struggle, right? So that's kind of my main takeaway from this poem, which I think is probably my favorite poem in the collection, just because there's this, on the surface of it, it's just a funny poem that doesn't seem to fit within the collection until you actually take the time to go, what is Dane Smith actually asking for in this poem, right? And then we see that there's actually a lot of layers there. Second poem to really kind of focus on, I think, is the Every Day is a Funeral and a Miracle, which has a combination of juxtaposing Dane Smith's life and fear of being a black person, and the struggles of that, and living in a society that is willing to and sees Black people as dispensable, while also dealing with the fact that they are HIV positive and what that means. Because in this same way, right, in which an outsourced number of American communities, as well as just Western countries in general, tend to view minority lives as less than white lives for whatever reason. In that same way, we also struggle with this privatized healthcare, in which healthcare that can be used to save lives is not accepted or available to people who cannot afford it, right? And I really think that's what this is playing on, because HIV and AIDS, in a larger scale sense, is not a death sentence anymore. It is something that we have medication for that can limit its effects, not cure it, but limit its effects. However, that medication is expensive. And if you are living in an area that doesn't have adequate healthcare, or you cannot get adequate healthcare, then it is a death sentence, right? In the same way that simply being Black in the wrong neighborhood is also a death sentence. I really think that that's kind of what this Every Day is a Funeral and a Miracle kind of plays on. Yeah. Then we get to the final poem, which I think is, obviously the capstone poem is always really important. Capstone for this one is Dream Where Every Black Person is Standing by the Ocean. And I think that there are two very different ways to read this. You can either read this as a very hopeful poem, or you can read this as a very distressing, desperate poem. If you're looking at this as a hopeful poem, I think you're reading the ocean as this symbol of rebirth, as this, although we cannot necessarily gain the dead back and the atrocities back, there is hope that these wrongs will eventually be righted. If you want to look at this as a much more desperate, destructive poem, I think you're reading the ocean as being very much more like the abyss, this vast nothingness. And I am more inclined to that reading for two reasons. Number one is the reference to Emmett, which I believe is reference to Emmett Till. This published in 2017. I believe we're closing in on 100 years since the wrongful lynching of Emmett Till. And I think what we're seeing by referencing Emmett is this concept that it does not matter how far we have come in the past 100 years, we are still fighting the same battles that we were 100 years ago. And if we're still fighting that, have we actually gotten anywhere? Or are we just making it look nicer? Another, I think, reading this that gives it much more distressing kind of tone to it is this idea that even if this isn't Emmett Till, if this is just someone who happens to be named Emmett, we have a dream where every Black person is standing on the shore, right? every black person is standing by the ocean, and we are able to recall one person from the abyss. What does that say about us as a society, right? If we are only able to recall one person despite every black person being there, well, that tells us that there's something insurmountable against the abyss, that all of our struggling and all of our fighting and all of that has resulted in the abyss not claiming one person, which I think is a very, very dark and distressing kind of end to this. Certainly I'm not Dane Smith, and I cannot know what they intended by using this as the capstone poem. But yeah, I am inclined to read it as a much more distressing poem, but I think that there's an argument that this can be seen as a hopeful poem. Yeah. This was read as part of my gender and sexuality class. I don't know if I mentioned it at the top. Yeah. And that is Don't Call Us Dead by Dane Smith.